Hi and welcome to Doc Rides. We're going for a little spin today. I thought I'd tell you a weird story. I've been meaning to make an update video about the Goldwing because I've had it for a little bit now. Where are we at? 4,694 kilometers. So I guess I've put around 2,000 kilometers on it. And you know, I don't have any regrets, but there are some things I would definitely change for the next model. One of the main ones being where this horn is located. It's such a tiny button. It's not, horns should be mashable. When you're hitting the horn, when I'm hitting the horn, it means I'm in a bit of an emergency. That button is in a terrible location. But I'm going to do that in a separate video because I think I need to be a little bit better organized. I probably have to write it down and actually put some effort into that video as opposed to my usual ramblings, rambling ride-alongs. Fall has arrived. It is not cold, but it's certainly not warm anymore. I think the first ride I went on this bike that I recorded, it was 40 degrees Celsius, or maybe even higher, 44 or something. Today it's probably 16 degrees Celsius. The problem with this part of the country, the riding season is limited. You know what, maybe we'll go the other way. I'll just go the other way. The hell with it. We haven't gone out this way anyway. It's kind of pretty. So, I thought I'd talk about some grave errors on today's ride along. It may not be a real long video. I'll just cut it off at some point so I'm not rambling too much. My dad was my best friend. He was I've talked about him quite a bit on this I guess this YouTube channel, but I'll just go into a little detail about him. His name was John, which is also my name and is technically my son's name as well. He's an engineer, worked at the phone company and then worked for the oil company out here in St. John, and then branched out on his own, and he was a consultant for the last, I think, 13 or 14 years of his life. A really, really smart guy, lovely man, great father. He was very funny. He had a wicked sense of humor, and he loved motorcycles. And so even from an early age, he had me riding dirt bikes and that kind of thing. He helped me buy my first bike, which is the 1979 Honda XR80, or 78 maybe, XR80, that's still in our shed in Shediac that I just got kind of fixed up this year. And when I moved back home to start my job, I'd been away for, I gotta think about it, 3 years for my undergrad, 4 years for medical school, 5 years for residency, and 1 year for fellowship. So whatever that is, 13 years maybe. And one of the first things we did was we got back into riding together. He had taken me on a lot of pretty decent rides. When I was in Nova Scotia, he grew up in a little town called Pugwash, Nova Scotia, and we used to ride from my apartment in Halifax, and we would go out to Pugwash, or we would go around Economy 5 Islands. We always had these kind of cool rides, but then when I moved away, his friend Bob died. I've talked about this a little bit before. He died in a motorcycle wreck, and we sold my bike, and then Dad sold his bike. But then when I came home, you know, it's probably 5 or 6 years after. I'm getting my timeline all screwy, but anyway, there was a period there where we didn't have motorcycles. About a year or two after I got back, we got the itch, and obviously all of a sudden we had a riding partner that we trusted and that we wanted to ride with. And I was the first one to break down. I bought that 2009 Superglide Custom, which was a phenomenal bike, and I'm still kind of regretting selling it, but I traded it in on this. So you know, it is what it is. This is a lot more motorcycle for the money than that was. it wasn't an even trade. I shouldn't say for the money. This is just a lot more motorcycle. It's not necessarily better bang for the buck, because it was also more expensive. So I got that bike, and then he really wanted a Road King. I remember even when I was a kid, he wanted a Harley Davidson Road King, like when they first kind of came out with the new ones, with the 88 CI ones. And I think they've been around forever, but he found a ex-rental bike from we used to have a Harley Davidson dealership here, and he borrowed it, he rented it for a day, took it out, and that was the day I actually crashed his motorcycle, testing whether it had anti-lock brakes, because I'm a stupid moron. Oh, I don't want to go into town, actually. We're gonna go up here. Let's just go for we'll see the rest of the country out this way. So I actually dumped his bike, and then I felt so bad because it was the day he rented it, and he decided he did want it. It didn't do any damage to the bike, but it might have warped the front brake. I'm still not sure. I just replaced the front brake rotors. I don't know if you're hearing a lot of wind noise. I've got a dead cat on this lapel mic that I'm using, the Purple Panda mic, but it is windy in my helmet. That's September in New Brunswick. It's always like that. It's a side wind. The windshield does nothing. So I felt bad, and I talked to him that night about it. Yeah, I really want it. I love that bike, and I don't know if you saw it in the garage at the beginning of this video, but I called the dealership. It was like, he said, it's just like $3,000 more than I want to pay. I think they wanted $9,000 for it. He was looking for something for $6,000. Anyway, I called the dealership the next morning, and I put a $3,000 payment on it for him. Which is the only nice thing I've ever done as a son. Usually he did so much for me. He helped me pay my rent, he paid my mortgage, like, well, he never paid my mortgage, but he paid my rent when I ran out of money. He had to pay for my tuition a few years because my loan wasn't big enough, and so at least I could do was, you know, make up the difference on a motorcycle of his that I crashed before he even bought it. So we rode together a lot, and it was like our thing. That was our father-son bonding time. And my son actually got really into dirt bikes. He had just started getting interested when Dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, unfortunately in summer of 2017. Jack was born in 2012, so he was just 5. But we got him a 50cc bike, and he was just learning how to ride it when Dad went downhill. So Dad was diagnosed in July of 2017, and we were just in the process. I was looking at a 1957 Chevy Bel Air. I still wish I'd bought it. It was they wanted $15,000 for it. It needed work, like it was a project, but it wasn't like disgusting. It wasn't completely rotted out or anything, and it still worked and drove, and the drivetrain was fine. And he and I had kind of talked about it, and we were going to try to restore a car. And then we went to Shediac one day. There's a pier there called, oh man, what's the name? Pointe de Chine Wharf. And my son loves fishing and that kind of thing. So I said, well, why don't we go up? Dad and Mom had a little place up there that they had just built. I said, why don't we go up and we'll go fishing and meet Dad for lunch. He was up there, and my mom was away. My brother lives in Australia, and she was visiting him. And we went up, and I met Dad for lunch, and he looked really thin. And Dad was like me. He was like a robust guy. He could eat pretty much anything. And they served him his lunch, and he was just pushing it around the plate. And so I kind of figured out, oh man, I really don't like the looks of this. I asked him, you know, what's going on? He said, oh, it must be my reflux. I haven't been able to eat much. And the other thing that happened is I went to visit him one day, and Dad would wake up at 6 and start working and work till 11. He loved work. Like, he loved his work. He loved helping businesses start up and that kind of thing. And I went over, it was like my lunch hour, so it would have been like 12:15 by the time I got to his house. And he was in bed asleep. And I woke him up and I said, what's going on? He said, I don't know, I'm just sleeping so much. So between that and him pushing food around on his plate, I thought, oh shit, he's got something. Sure enough, it was pancreatic cancer. It had spread to his liver. So it was pretty much a terminal diagnosis at that point. But he was determined to try his best to beat the odds. We knew it wasn't great. They gave him 3 months and he lived another 1.5 years. So, you know, he did, I think, 26 rounds of like this chemotherapy that just kicks the absolute living shit out of you if you do it. It's called fulferinox. So 5-FU, irinotecan, oxaliplatin. There was something else. He was kind of semi-allergic to some of the stuff. He had to take a ton of steroids. And it just beat the living shit out of him. And so he kept riding. We rode that summer of 2016. He was still okay. But he was getting progressively weaker. The next summer, he could hardly hold his motorcycle up. And so I actually bought a Honda Nighthawk 450, a 1983 bike, I think for $1,200 or something, just so he could keep riding because it was really light. And he rode that a few times and then he couldn't hold that up either. So I rode it for a while after he died and then sold it. This is the well, misnamed St. John Airport. We're actually out in French Village here. It's always a little weird going this way. They should have called it the French Village Airport, but then nobody would know where they're going. However, there is something funny that happens here. There's a St. John, New Brunswick and a St. John's, Newfoundland. St. John's, Newfoundland is like the capital city of Newfoundland. It's a big city. St. John is a medium-sized city. I think our population's around 70,000. St. John's would be, and surrounding areas, probably 200,000. And people from not Canada keep flying into St. John and then thinking they're in St. John's, Newfoundland. And I flew in one time and there were like 4 guys from India who hardly spoke any English. And there were no taxis here and they were looking around like, what is this? And I said, oh, do you guys need a ride? Like I have my car at the airport. And they said, we need to go. I shouldn't do the accent, that's racist now. Back in the day you could do it. Not allowed anymore. But they said, we need to go to the Signal Hill Hilton. Now, I've lived in St. John's. They said, oh shit. I said, that's, you're in the wrong city. What? We don't understand. I said, you're in St. John, New Brunswick. You need to go to St. John's, Newfoundland. It was like 1 in the morning. So I called the Hilton in St. John and explained it to them. They said, that happens about once a week. They said, send them over. We'll put them up. So yeah, that's a little tidbit about St. John's. So anyway, Dad made it a 1.5 years, like I said, and we got to Christmas of the next year. It was early Christmas season, and he was sick. He lost all his hair by then. He didn't look like himself. He looked a lot like his mother, weirdly, because he always had a mustache, and he was a really handsome man, unlike his fugly son. But yeah, he lost his mustache and he was looking pretty weird, and he was getting admitted to the hospital a lot. He kept getting sepsis. The tumor had obstructed his bile ducts, and he would keep getting like he had them stented, but it kept growing into the stent, I think, is what was happening, despite all the chemo he was doing. And so he would get like obstructed in his bile duct, and he would get ascending cholangitis, which is infection in the bile ducts. And finally he went in one time, it was around the end of November, beginning of December. Now, leading up to Christmas, he knew it would be his last, and he had let's go to St.Martin. This is awesome, actually. Pretty area. I don't know if I'll regret this, because I got enough gas. What the heck. Just got to watch for animals here. Be cognizant. So he got he got really into like decorating for Christmas. I went out and put up lights all around their house, and he couldn't do much, but he could sit in their living room, and I put lights in the bushes, like colored lights in the bushes outside their living room. And it snowed like in November, which it usually doesn't, and he would sit there and listen to jazz. He got into like Dave Brubeck and like that kind of thing, because he was always into Jeopardy, and there was a jazz category, and it reminded him how much he liked it. So he was sitting there learning about jazz, and like that was my last good memory of him. I think it was like a day later or 2 days later, he ended up back in the hospital, and he was kind of in and out of consciousness. He was septic. They treated him, and he became aware of what was going on. He became like totally lucid and seemed like himself. And he was talking to me, and our friend Dave came in to see him, and he talked to Dave like it was a normal day. And Jack had a concert, and so I said, I'm gonna go to Jack's concert. I'll be right back. Like I didn't want to leave, but I figured he was like coming around because of the antibiotics. And he said, oh, I'll be fine. Like, go, you know, don't miss the concert. Just, well, I'll see you later tonight. So I went out. Jack had this like concert for School of Rock or whatever. That was kind of neat. And then when I got back, he was unconscious again. And it was really sad. Like he was just, I don't know, he was a little bit in and out. He never, I gotta say, Dad never really lost his dignity with his sickness. He never had like, he never shit himself or anything, is basically what I'm saying. And he still never did. He had enough like capacity to tell us he needed to go to the bathroom, but he never wanted me to help him with stuff like that. But I had to lift him up onto the commode. I shouldn't even be telling you this. He wouldn't want to know about like this stuff. But just to say, like, I knew it was the end when I had to pick him up to put him on the can. Anyway, and then he slipped out of consciousness. I called my brother. He flew in from Australia, and by the time Dan got there, Dad was like unconscious completely. Dan walked into the room. We always kind of just joked around about things, but he walked in and he said, "Hi, Dad." And he looked at him and he said, "Sorry, you're a vegetable." And I will say, Dad, like, he came around a little bit, and he could talk like this. Like, his brain was obviously dying. But his last words to me were, "I sound like Stephen Hawking." It's not politically correct, but there you go. Those were his last words. Anyway, so he died on December 3rd. Now, we'd had some snow, which was a little bit unusual. And leading up to him dying, I had gone on a hunt for, like, I hadn't left while he was actively dying, but in those months, I had talked to Mom. I said, do you know, like, what are you going to do after he dies? Like, we didn't have graves. We didn't have a plan. She said, well, we need to find a burial plot for the whole family that we can all use. Like, I want us all to be buried together. I said, okay. I didn't even run it by my wife. I was like, whatever you need. So I went looking all around here, and I found one in Hampton that was really nice, except the person he was beside had like a grave with a Toronto Maple Leafs etching on it, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cheesy. And then I looked across the view, and it was a sewage treatment plant on the on the other side of the slope, and I was like, okay, not this one. We looked in St. John. I thought that would be nice. It was convenient. We could go visit him lots. And then Dad said, I want to be buried in Pugwash, where I grew up. He loved Pugwash. It was always home for him. So we bought a plot in Pugwash, and they had just expanded the graveyard there. So we bought a plot with, like, I think it was 5 or 6 graves all side by side. Myself, my wife, my mom, my dad, my brother, and his wife could all be buried there if we all died in the area. And you know, sure, it overlooks the salt mine and stuff, but Dad worked at the salt mine for a long time, and you know, that was the stuff he loved. So now it's a little bit of an ordeal transporting a dead body across provincial lines, but we figured it out. It just cost a lot of money. And we did the funeral. the funeral home visitation, by the way, we did 2 of them, and they ended up being like 7 hours each. And in the second one, about 2/3 of the way through, the heel of my shoe, because I don't wear dress shoes ever, I just wear them to funerals and weddings, the heel of my dress shoe exploded. Got all this like rubber everywhere at Brennan's funeral home. Anyway, so after the funeral and everything, we were supposed to go up to Pugwash the next day for the internment, and it had snowed a little bit in Pugwash too. And so like, we weren't sure they'd be able to bury him, but they said, yeah, we can do it. Okay, no problem. So we drove up that night, and the next morning the service was early. It was like at 8 o'clock. But we didn't follow the hearse up. We just went up separately and met at Dad's old house that he grew up in. So we all get dressed up and we go out to go to the graveyard, and I'm looking where our graves are, and there's nobody there. And I scan up the hill, and up by where Dad's mom and father were buried is there, sure enough, there's a casket hanging over an open grave with a dirt mound beside it with the, you know, the green fake grass or golf green stuff over the dirt mound. I said, oh shit. Knew exactly what had happened. They had wires had gotten crossed at the funeral home, and they thought he was supposed to be buried by his mother and father. And so we went up, and of course the minister's there, like, you've got to organize all this stuff. And I said, Mom, do we say anything? She said, I don't know, we'll figure it out after. I said, after he'll be in the ground. It's like, and it's getting cold. She said, well, I think we'll just talk to them afterwards. So, okay, no problem. Go through the service, you know. Sure enough, they bury him. I went out the next day to see if they'd moved him. No, they buried him there. So we talked to the funeral home, and they said, well, look, there's still room for your mother beside where we buried him, because excavating and bringing him out, like, then it's a big ordeal. Then it's like you need, like, the court's permission to basically dig up a body. Of course, you can't just go and do it. So I said, well, I guess if there's room for Mom or whatever, that's fine. So we left it at that. The next day was a weekend, a Sunday. There's nobody at the funeral home. I went out and put a wreath on his grave before I headed home, and I just kind of, as I was doing it, I stepped on something under the snow, and I brushed it off, and there's one of those flat graves immediately beside him. And the weird thing was, when they buried him, I said, there's a bronze casket on the wall of this grave. I could see it. I could see the handle and the bronze on the side. Dad's in an oak coffin because it was cheaper, of course. But sure enough, there's some guy buried there from like the 1970s. So there's no room for any of us. So Dad is going to be around the corner from us when we go in the ground, assuming we go in the ground up there. Really weird. I'm not sure. Can they just stack them like cordwood? Can they put Mom on top of them? I don't know how it works. Anyway, so Dad is buried in the wrong grave. They made a grave error. And we never exhumed him and moved him. We just left him there because he loved his father. He had a complicated relationship with his mother, but he loved her. Yeah. And I don't think he'd want to put Mom through the exhumation and all that stuff just for, you know, when you're dead, who gives a shit? So yeah, that's the story of Dad's grave. Now, I would have had less sympathy for them over that mistake, but I've dug a wrong grave myself. So, back in like 2013, I was fairly new here. My wife had adopted a dog when she was in college, and the dog couldn't live with us when we were doing our fellowship, so Lennox was the dog. He stayed with my mom and dad in St. John at their house in Rosse. And I didn't get to see the dog a whole lot, but when we moved home, we got the dog again. So I'd lived with him for a year. My last year in Halifax, he lived with us. So I got pretty close with this dog. I don't know what it was. He was just like, he was irritating. He barked a lot. He loved Chrissy, and at first hated me anytime I'd touch her. Like if I touched her shoulder, he'd bite me. But you know, I gave him treats, and he came around to me, and we got him trained to the point that he wouldn't bite people, and I was kind of proud of that. And he was a funny dog, like just a ton of personality. Not necessarily a nice dog, but just a good, I don't know, dog, a terrier type dog. He was Nova Scotia duck toller, I think, but he was also a rescue dog. Anyway, we'd been back for 2 years or 3 years, and he got this lump on his tail, and I said, fuck, I think it's a cancer. He'd had a cancer before that we had to take off, and it ended up being a spindle cell sarcoma, and then the vet did an ultrasound. It spread all through his liver, and he was a good dog. Like my dad, he kept his dignity for a long time, but one day I came home and he'd shit all over the basement. There was blood everywhere, and I was like, all right, the dog's dying. So I said, let's do everything we can and see if we can make him feel better. We were going to give him steroids and stuff. We actually went as far as taking this dog to UPEI and seeing if they could do anything, like if there was a chemotherapy he could do or anything like that. But they said, look, we can't keep him alive. Like, there's nothing we can do. So over the phone, we had to agree to put the dog down. Fucking heartbreaking. Now, is it more heartbreaking than actually being there? I don't know. But I felt really guilty for not being there with him. Anyway, so this is an awfully depressing episode, isn't it? Anyway, whatever. So Chrissy's dad was alive at the time, and he made a grave for Lennox because he loved Lennox. And he made this like really complex like gravestone that was made of wood and had a picture of the dog and all this stuff. And he said, why don't you bury him in Shediac on your property, on like mom and dad's property, because he loved it there. Absolutely, yeah, that's a great idea. So the thing was, I didn't have the dog's body, and mom and dad were in Australia, and I couldn't oh sweet, I couldn't what the hell was I saying? Oh, I couldn't get the time off work to go get the dog's body. So what we were gonna do, Dad was going to come home from Australia and get the dead dog that was in a freezer and come bury it where I dug the grave. And they weren't home to consult with. And so I went out on the rainiest, most miserable day with a shovel and a pickaxe, and I went in the field and I started pickaxing my way down, and wouldn't you know it, the ground is all rock, like shale rock. So I pickaxed until I had no skin left on my hands. I was like a wild man in the rain, in the dark. It was like a Stephen King novel. And I pickaxed my way down about 5 feet down and dug a fairly sizable grave. Now, this really nice man, when I went to buy stuff to make a coffin for the dog, was at Home Depot and said, I'll give you a dogwood tree and I'll build your coffin for you. I feel bad. I was like probably tearing up because I missed the dog so much. And I said, that's really kind. Are you sure? Yeah, definitely. So he built this beautiful coffin, although it was, you know, black plywood basically. But it was really big. The guy never told him how small the dog was. The dog was like Stella, you know, but from that mirror to that mirror, you know. So I really had to dig this hole pretty deep. And I did dig it pretty deep. So I wasn't there, and then Mom and Dad flew home. They went to PEI, got the dead dog, drove it back to Shediac, and I get this call while I'm at work. Did you dig this grave? I said, yeah. Said, that's not our property. I didn't know. I thought they owned the field. It was the next door neighbor's property. I said, did anybody say anything? He said, no, they're not here. I said, put the dog in it. We buried the dog on somebody else's lawn. I didn't put the grave up because I didn't want them to know. I put the grave in the shed and never told Bob that his beautiful grave marker was not used because they buried the dog at the wrong house. Anyway, yeah, so it can happen to anyone. So do I hold the funeral home accountable for what happened to Dad? No, that would be... mistakes happen, you know. There was a light dusting of snow and they buried him in the wrong grave. Yeah, that's about the end of the story. I did actually, my cousin Sally was in her 80s. She was a really interesting lady. I will add to this story a little bit, because she was from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. She grew up close to Dad, but she was the first member of our family to go to an Ivy League school. I think she's still the only one who actually went to an Ivy League school. She went to Harvard and became a doctor of anthropology and archaeology, and so she was a professor out in Spokane, Washington. Really, really interesting lady. Hated to fly. In fact, when the pandemic started, she was on the Queen Mary. She was supposed to be going for a cruise for a year, and she ended up quarantined on the ship, and she got shingles, and she's in a fucking state. This was after my dad died. But she took it really hard when Dad died. So Dad died December 2018, so the pandemic obviously was like, I think she was on the ship as it was breaking out in 2020, and she got stuck on it for a long time, until it like basically docked for good. She was stuck on it. But Sally died in 2022, I believe. She had a couple of, she was, you know, overweight. She wasn't a very healthy person, but she was in her 80s, and she had knee replacements and then never really recovered from them, and then she had a stroke, and she had a clot in her heart. Like if you have atrial fibrillation, the heart isn't squeezing well, so you can get clots in like your atrial appendages in the atria. And they wanted to do a Watchman procedure on her, which is like basically putting a filter in her heart, and I think she had another big stroke and died or her stroke bled maybe after that. So now she was in Washington, and she wanted to be buried in Nova Scotia as well, same as Dad. But she was buried in Spokane, no, what's it called? St. Anna's, I think it's called. It's like this little, it's tucked away somewhere in the middle of nowhere cemetery. It is the most beautiful place I've ever been. I kind of wish we'd buried Dad there, although who the hell knows where they would have put him. But it has a lot, most of our family is buried there. But interestingly, after Sally died, we had to clean out her house in Antigonish. She left it to my mother, and it had a hole in the roof, and a bunch of mice and rats and stuff had gotten in, and there was a lot of water damage. It was a pretty house on a big piece of land, but we couldn't get anything for it. Like, I think Mom might have sold it for $100,000. I'm going to continue on towards St. Martin's. I just saw an animal in the woods there. I don't know if it was a bear or not. Anyway, so we had this my great aunt Gwen, which was my mother's sister. She had been in a nursing home for 20 years, and Mom was Gwen's like main point of contact. Mom is like, you know, she's kind of like a mini missionary. She goes and visits old people. She does all this stuff, and she had visited Gwen, and you know, she would bring her food and stuff, and Gwen got severe dementia, like she had Alzheimer's towards the end. Here we are in St. Martin's. This is going to be pretty. I see the ocean. So Gwen was, you know, not in her prime by any means. Now, speaking of nice graveyards, look at this place. St. William's. Looks like they got lots of room. Maybe I'll go there. since I'm going to be around the corner from Dad anyway. So this is the Bay of Fundy, and I don't know if that's PEI. I don't think that's PEI across there. You can see PEI from Nova Scotia. I think we're on the other side. All right, what the hell was I talking about? My Aunt Gwen, right? Oh, right. So Mom had put in all this work for Gwen. Now, we have family members who are kind of shit disturbers. And we had told them, like, you know, Gwen isn't well. She was decompensating at that point. But we were in Nova Scotia doing this, you know, the grave stuff for the house stuff for Sally's estate, and trying to get everything out of it and make it look half presentable. And we got a call from one of my cousins who hadn't seen Gwen, I should point out, in 25 years. And he said, oh, my wife and I are just up on the motorcycle and we went to the nursing home. They say Gwen is dying. I said, oh, for fuck's sake. So I put him on the phone with Mom, and he basically took her head off for not calling him directly to tell him that she was dying. And Mom said, well, I mean, she's been in the, you know, it's not my fault that she's dying. She was 100 years old. She said she's been in a nursing home for 25 years. Like, this is how life goes. Anyway, in the end, they were trying to get Mom cut out of her will. Because, I don't know why, just because they're assholes. Anyway, these were close family members, not that close, but, you know, cousins and that kind of thing, who I would have always been friendly with, but I am still pissed off at it. It's not like Gwen had a big estate. She had, you know, maybe $100,000 divided 15 ways or something. Like, it was not life-changing money. And Mom had always taken care of all that shit and everything else. And they talked about suing her and all this stuff after Gwen died. Mom felt terrible because she didn't know she was dying. The home never called her. So she tore off, and by the time she got there, Gwen was dead. She was all upset. These people were there yelling at her. It was just a fucking disaster. Families are so difficult. Look at the fall foliage. Here it is. It begins. Maple trees are the best for fall foliage, if you're curious. This isn't debatable. That's the end of my stories. I will say, speaking of things not being debatable, most, like 99% of the people who come on this channel and leave comments and stuff are the nicest, kindest, most helpful people you could imagine. You meet the nicest people on a Honda, but 1% of you are such dicks. What the fuck? If I say something you don't like, make your own video. I don't know. I don't work for you. I'm not getting paid. I'm putting these up so I can watch them in the winter when I can't ride. I don't know why you would feel you have to comment and tell me I'm not allowed to say something. I'm obviously allowed to say it. I just did. Yeah, keep it to yourself. I don't know what else to say. Fucking asshole. No, this is just like 2 or 3 people. Most people are super awesome. Like Goldwing Moments, thank you. You're a cool guy. Road Glide, super cool guy. I can't thank you guys enough for watching these. These are long videos that have no point. But, you know, Doo-doo told me that I'm not allowed to talk about America because I live in Canada. Go fuck yourself. I don't care. Make your own video. Say what you want to say. Don't try to control what other people say. And this is coming from a Canadian. A fairly chill Canadian. Yeah, gosh, this place is pretty. We'll do the covered bridge and then I'm going to sign off. If I don't wipe out on the covered bridge. If you're not used to the covered bridges, be careful. They're so slippery. They're so damn slippery. I don't know what makes them so bad. There's great ice cream out here somewhere over there. That's the Octopus Ice Cream Shack. It is friggin' awesome. Alright. This is like the most treacherous. Oh, wait. Did they? It's paved. Never mind. These aren't slippery. The ones that aren't asphalt, the ones that are bare wood, I think they accumulate like tar and exhaust and stuff, and they're just absolutely horrendous for riding a motorcycle on. I feel like you're doing this the whole way. All right, I'm going to take this corner because I can't sign off without my fingers. Ah, there you go. These caves up here, that's what I was hoping to see. Don't know if you can see it because the GoPro obviously is wide angle, but those caves you can walk to when the tide's out, and then you can get stuck in them when the tide comes in, which is exciting. One of the most beautiful places in the world, St. Martin's, New Brunswick. All right, I'm going to sign off. Talk later. Bye-bye.